the luminous court lived up to its name in ways that made Marcus Webb's eyes ache after extended exposure. Crystalline architecture captured light and refracted it through patterns suggesting divine authority, every surface designed to remind observers that the Empress commanded even illumination itself. Courtiers arranged themselves in precise hierarchical formations, their positions calculated down to the centimeter based on rank, favor, and the complex social mathematics that governed Valkesh society. Empress Zarathi sat above it all, literally on a throne platform elevated 12 feet above the court floor, and figuratively as absolute monarch, whose words shaped reality for billions of Valkesh across 17 star systems. She was also watching Marcus with attention that made every diplomatic instinct he possessed scream warnings. "Cultural liaison web," Zarathi said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Valkesh language sound like music and made Marcus's translation implant work overtime. "I would value your perspective on the poetry readings planned for tomorrow's cultural exchange. Perhaps we could discuss over private dinner." This was the 4th time this week she'd suggested private dinners. Marcus had developed increasingly creative excuses. "Your Radiance, I'm honored by the invitation, but I have urgent reports to file with Earth's diplomatic corps regarding the trade negotiations." He maintained professional smile while his brain calculated escape routes. "Perhaps my assistant could provide the poetry analysis you're seeking." Zaratha's skin shifted through colors, iridescent blues deepening to purples that Marcus's cultural training identified as indicating frustration. "Your reports can surely wait a few hours. Unfortunately, the time difference with Earth means I have a narrow window for real-time communication," Marcus said, which was technically true but mostly tactical evasion. "I deeply regret that I cannot accept your gracious invitation." He bowed with precise courtesy that Valkesh protocol demanded, then retreated before she could extend the invitation further. Behind him, he could feel the courtier's confusion. Refusing the Empress's attention simply didn't happen in their culture. Captain Sarah Chen, his security detail and the only other human currently in the luminous court, fell into step beside him as he exited the throne room. "You're running out of excuses," she observed quietly. "4th private dinner invitation this week, plus the garden tour you somehow couldn't attend, the private poetry reading you had schedule conflicts with, and the cultural discussion session you suddenly needed to prepare for despite having no preparation requirements." "I'm aware my evasion skills are approaching their limits," Marcus muttered. "She's an Empress who commands 17 star systems," Chen continued. "You're a cultural liaison who's been here 6 weeks. The power differential alone is exactly why I'm evading," Marcus finished. "Thank you for the reminder about the ethical nightmare I'm navigating." They reached his quarters, and Marcus collapsed into the chair with exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. 6 weeks of politely declining an Empress's increasingly obvious interest was more diplomatically draining than 3 years of treaty negotiations. "She's going to corner you eventually," Chen said. "And when she does, you're going to have to actually explain instead of inventing urgent Earth communications." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm just hoping to postpone that conversation until I've figured out how to explain human consent ethics to someone whose entire culture operates on monarchs claim what they desire and subordinates consider it honor." "Good luck with that," Chen said. "Based on her skin color shifts, I'd estimate you have maybe 48 hours before she stops accepting excuses and demands actual explanation." Chen's estimate was optimistic. Marcus made it 36 hours before Zarathi used her authority to create confrontation he couldn't diplomatically escape. The summons came during what should have been Marcus's rest period. A formal request from the Empress for immediate private audience in her personal chambers, phrased politely, but carrying the weight of command that made request a diplomatic fiction. Marcus arrived to find Zarathi alone, having dismissed her usual retinue of attendants and guards. Her chambers were less ostentatious than the throne room, but still designed to remind visitors of her authority. High ceilings, expensive art, furniture that managed to be both beautiful and uncomfortable in ways that discouraged casual lounging. She stood by the window overlooking the capital city, her skin cycling through colors suggesting emotional states Marcus couldn't quite interpret. "Sit," she said, not a request. Marcus sat in the chair she indicated, maintaining professional posture while his instincts screamed that this conversation was going to be exactly as uncomfortable as he'd feared. 6 weeks, Zarathi said, still looking out the window. You have been in my court for 6 weeks. In that time, I have extended invitations for private dinners, cultural discussions, tour of my personal gardens, poetry readings, and philosophical conversations. You have declined every single invitation, with excuses that become less convincing each time. Your radiance, I apologize if my scheduling conflicts have caused offense. Stop, Zarathi interrupted, her voice sharp enough to cut through diplomatic deflection. I am 300 years old. I have navigated court politics that would make your human strategists weep. I can recognize evasion. She turned to face him, her eyes holding depths that suggested centuries of accumulated experience. Why are you evading me? Marcus tried one more deflection. I believe maintaining professional boundaries between cultural liaison and head of state serves the diplomatic relationship best. That's a rehearsed answer, Zarathi said. I'm asking for the truth. You owe me that much courtesy, cultural liaison. Why do you refuse my attention? The weight of her authority pressed against him, making evasion feel like an insult to someone who commanded billions. Marcus made the calculation that continuing to dance around the truth was becoming more disrespectful than stating it directly. Because I'm attracted to you, he said quietly, and acting on it would be catastrophic abuse of the power differential between us. The silence that followed was absolute. Zarathi's skin cycled through colors so rapidly that Marcus's translation software couldn't keep up with the emotional states. Shock, confusion, anger, confusion, something his implant couldn't identify at all. She stared at him like he'd just spoken in language that used familiar words, but combined them in ways that violated basic grammar. You are attracted to me, she said slowly, testing each word. But you refuse because acting on it would be abuse. She paused, processing. Abuse of whom? I am Empress. You hold no power over me. No, Marcus agreed. You hold all the power over me. That's the problem. I don't understand. Zarathi's confusion appeared genuine, her colors stabilizing into patterns suggesting she was truly trying to comprehend rather than dismissing his concern. In Valkesh culture, when someone of higher rank shows interest in subordinate, it is honor. The subordinate accepts with gratitude. In human culture, Marcus said carefully, relationships between people with significant power differentials are inherently suspect because the person with less power can never truly refuse without consequences. But I'm not forcing you. You don't have to, Marcus interrupted gently. Your authority does it for you. You're an empress who could destroy my career, my reputation, my entire future with a single word. Even if you never consciously threatened me, that power exists in every interaction we have. If I accepted your invitations, if we became involved, I could never be certain I was choosing freely, or if I was responding to implicit coercion built into our positions. Zarathi sat down slowly, her movements suggesting she was processing information that contradicted fundamental assumptions. You think I would punish you for refusing me? I think you might, Marcus said honestly. Not consciously, not deliberately, but power works in subtle ways. If I refused you and then next week there was a diplomatic dispute, would you unconsciously favor solutions that disadvantaged Earth because I'd rejected you? I don't know, you might not even know. And that uncertainty is exactly why the power differential makes this impossible. So you protect yourself by refusing in advance, Zarathi said, understanding dawning. No, Marcus corrected. I protect you by refusing. Because if I accepted your attention while working in your court, subject to your authority, I'd be exploiting access my position provides. I'd be taking advantage of the fact that you can't know whether my interest is genuine or strategic, whether I want you or whether I want the benefits that relationship with an empress could provide. Zarathi's skin went through colors that Marcus's cultural training identified as shock transforming into something like horror. You're saying that because of my power, you cannot know if your choices are your own, and I cannot know if your interest is genuine. Yes, Marcus confirmed. That's exactly what I'm saying. The Empress sat in silence, her colors cycling through patterns suggesting internal crisis. Marcus waited, recognizing that he'd just introduced concept so alien to Valkesh culture that it required processing time. I have lived 300 years, Zarathi said finally, her voice very quiet. I have had many relationships with courtiers, advisors, warriors, artists, and I never once questioned whether they truly chose me or whether they accepted my attention because refusing an empress would destroy them. Marcus's chest tightened with sympathy for the existential crisis he'd just triggered. I'm sorry, that's not a comfortable realization. Has anyone ever actually chosen me? Zarathi asked, and the vulnerability in her voice made Marcus's professional distance waver. Or have 300 years of relationships been people protecting themselves from consequences of rejecting ultimate authority? The question hung in the crystalline chamber like indictment of everything Zarathi's power had touched. Her skin had settled into colors suggesting deep emotional processing, and Marcus found himself in the uncomfortable position of having stripped away an empress's certainty about her entire relationship history. I can't answer that, Marcus said gently. I don't know your past partners or their motivations, but I can tell you that in human ethics, relationships between people with significant power differentials require very careful navigation precisely because of the questions you're asking. Tell me about human ethics, Zarathi said, and it wasn't a request. It was Empress demanding education about framework that had just dismantled her worldview. Explain how your species handles power and relationships. Marcus organized his thoughts, trying to translate complex ethical frameworks across species and cultural boundaries. Humans learned through painful history that people in positions of power often abuse that power in intimate relationships, sometimes deliberately but often unconsciously. We developed frameworks trying to prevent that abuse. What frameworks? Consent, Marcus said. The principle that all parties must freely agree to relationship without coercion. But consent becomes complicated when there's power differential, because the person with less power faces consequences for refusing that the person with more power doesn't face. He gestured between them. If I refuse your invitation to dinner, I risk offending an empress who controls my employment, my access to Valkesh society, my entire mission here. If you refuse my invitation, which I'd never extend given our positions, you risk nothing. That asymmetry makes genuine consent questionable. So power itself makes consent impossible, Zarathi asked. Not impossible, Marcus corrected, but significantly complicated. Some humans in power positions choose relationships only with people outside their authority structures. Others establish formal protections, explicit conversations about power, documented agreements, relationships with people who have sufficient independent power that refusing carries minimal consequences. And for someone like me, Zarathi's colors suggested she already knew the answer, but needed to hear it confirmed. An empress with absolute authority over everyone in my empire. Your options are limited, Marcus admitted. You could seek relationships outside your empire, with people from other species or civilizations where you hold no authority. You could establish such strong formal protections that refusing you becomes genuinely safe. Or, he hesitated, or, Zarathi prompted, or you accept that your position might mean you can't have intimate relationships that aren't tainted by power differential, Marcus finished quietly. Some humans in similar positions choose celibacy rather than risk exploiting others. The colors shifting across Zarathi's skin suggested she was processing emotions Marcus couldn't name. You're telling me that 300 years of power means 300 years of potentially coercive relationships, and going forward my choices are to exploit others or be alone. I'm telling you that power has costs humans recognize, but Valkesh culture apparently doesn't, Marcus said. Whether those costs are worth paying is decision only you can make. Zarathi stood, paced to the window, stared out at her capital city for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice carried weight of centuries. I thought you were rejecting me, that you found me unattractive, uninteresting, unworthy of your attention. She turned back to face him. But you were protecting me. From exploitation I couldn't see because my power blinds me to the coercion I carry everywhere. Yes, Marcus confirmed. You found me attractive but refused because acting on that attraction while subject to my authority would mean you couldn't trust your own choices and I couldn't trust your motivations. Yes. And you evaded my invitations, not because you didn't want to spend time with me, but because accepting them would create situation where neither of us could be certain whether choices were genuine or coerced by power differential. Yes, Marcus said for the third time. Zarathi's colors shifted through patterns that looked like grief. Every relationship I've ever had might have been people protecting themselves from destroying their lives by refusing an empress who wanted them. Possibly, Marcus acknowledged. I can't know for certain, but the possibility exists, and human ethics says that possibility is enough to require extreme caution. How do you live with that uncertainty? Zarathi asked. How do humans in power have any relationships if they can never know if consent is genuine? Some don't, Marcus said honestly. Some accept loneliness as cost of authority. Others try to mitigate through the protections I mentioned, though those are imperfect solutions. And some humans, many humans, abuse their power anyway because ignoring consent ethics is easier than accepting limitations. Which one are you? Zarathi asked. I'm someone trying not to abuse power I don't even formally hold, Marcus said. Because implicit authority, the power dynamic that exists whether we acknowledge it or not, is still power. And I'd rather evade your invitations forever than exploit access my position provides to relationship you might not have chosen if I wasn't working in your court. The Empress sat down again, her movements suggesting exhaustion that had nothing to do with physical exertion. I have never had someone value my autonomous choice enough to protect it from their own desires. That's probably true, Marcus agreed. In Valkesh culture, subordinates accept what authority offers because refusing has consequences. You've never had to question whether acceptance was genuine. And now I will question every relationship I've ever had, Zarathi said, and something in her voice suggested the crisis was genuine. Every partner, every intimate moment, every declaration of affection, all potentially coerced by my power rather than genuine choice. I'm sorry, Marcus said and meant it. That's not comfortable knowledge. No, Zarathi agreed, but it's necessary knowledge, because if you're correct about power and consent, then I have been unintentionally coercive for 300 years. Her colors stabilized into patterns suggesting determination. That must change. 3 months later, Marcus filed reports with Earth's diplomatic corps about the cultural revolution he'd accidentally triggered by explaining consent ethics to an absolute monarch. Zarathi had implemented reforms that shocked Valkesh society. Formal protections for subordinates who refused romantic attention from superiors. Explicit prohibition against using rank to pressure intimate relationships, and education programs teaching that power differential makes consent complicated rather than automatic. The court was scandalized. Traditionalists argued that hierarchy was foundation of Valkesh civilization and shouldn't be disrupted by alien ethics. Reformists celebrated that someone was finally acknowledging what they'd privately known but couldn't articulate, that authority coerces even when wielder doesn't intend coercion. Zarathi herself had become student of human relationship ethics, studying frameworks around power and consent with the same intensity she'd once applied to military strategy and political maneuvering. She met regularly with Marcus for discussions that remained strictly professional, bounded by the ethics he'd articulated, but built on foundation of mutual respect rather than implicit coercion. I may never have romantic relationship that isn't tainted by my authority, Zarathi admitted during one of their sessions. Every potential partner exists in context where refusing me carries consequences, even with formal protections. That's possible, Marcus acknowledged. Some humans in similar positions accept that as cost of power. Is loneliness worth absolute authority? Zarathi asked. I can't answer that for you, Marcus said, but I can tell you that understanding the question is more ethical than ignoring it, and continuing to believe subordinates' acceptance is genuine rather than survival response. Zarathi's colors shifted through patterns Marcus had learned to recognize as thoughtful processing. You still find me attractive. Yes, Marcus confirmed, because dishonesty would insult the understanding they'd built. But that doesn't change the power differential that makes acting on it ethically problematic. What if I abdicated? Zarathi asked. Gave up my authority, became private citizen, removed the power dynamic entirely. Then you'd no longer be the person I'm attracted to, Marcus said honestly. Part of what I find compelling is watching you navigate the responsibilities of your position. Asking you to give that up would be asking you to become someone else, which seems like different form of coercion. So we exist in permanent ethical stalemate, Zarathi observed. I cannot pursue relationship without exploiting power you're subject to, and you cannot accept without questioning whether your choices are your own. Yes, Marcus said, that's accurate assessment. Human ethics is extraordinarily frustrating, Zarathi said, but her colors suggested something like appreciation rather than anger. But also more respectful than anything Valkesh culture taught me about power and relationships. Her final log entry, months after their initial confrontation, acknowledged truths that 300 years of absolute power had obscured. She might never know if her past relationships were genuine or coerced. She might never have romantic connection untainted by her authority. Being Empress might mean accepting loneliness as cost of power. But understanding this was better than continuing to believe that subordinates' acceptance of her attention was choice rather than response to proximity to ultimate authority. Marcus's report to Earth noted that teaching consent ethics to species with absolute monarchies created existential crises in rulers who'd never questioned their right to claim what they desired. But that causing those crises might be more important than maintaining comfortable diplomatic relations. And somewhere in the luminous court, an empress who commanded 17 star systems sat alone